Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. As we gather, we are reminded that throughout Canada, we are situated on Indigenous land. So whether it's ceded treaty land or unceded land, it's steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. Today, I acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, of the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee and Neutral people whose traditional territory I'm broadcasting to you from live today. So Secret Path Week is a national movement commemorating the legacies of Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack. The Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund would like to inspire all Canadian classrooms to use this week to answer Gord Downie's call to action and to do something, as we share knowledge and work towards meaningful reconciliation. So all week long, we have an amazing series of live events for classrooms to join into. You can join in camera spots and interact directly. You can join in live via YouTube and send in questions via the chat. We are talking to Indigenous leaders, Indigenous artists, scientists, and more, learning all about the incredible work that they are doing as we work towards reconciliation. So I'm excited for today's event, our 11 o'clock event with Meagan Lortie. She is on her own journey of exploring her culture and ancestry. So when she was very young, she's been volunteering and working with urban Indigenous community and is very passionate about reconciliation and decolonization. So she coordinates the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's Uncovering Common Ground initiative. And today she's going to share some of the examples of some of the reconciliation projects that they've worked on. And we're going to explore some ideas about how people can get involved in their own communities. So let me bring Meagan in live here with us. Good morning, Meagan. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Super excited to be here.
All right, Meagan. Well, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit. We're going to get into a little Q&A action.
Perfect. All right. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. All right, so hopefully everybody's able to see this. So Ani Kinawaya, Megan Indigenakas, Barrie and Dinda. So hello everyone, my name is Megan and I'm currently living in Barrie, Ontario. I'm so excited to be here today to be on the Secret Path week for Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants and to talk to you a little bit more about Uncovering Common Ground, which is a Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's project. I also wanted to talk a little bit about today, what does reconciliation look like? Just because that's been a lot of our conversation at JGI, but also in the work that we've been doing with the youth as part of the Uncovering Common Ground project. But before we get started, I wanted to echo the land acknowledgement that Joe was able to share and just share a little one of my own. So currently in Barrie, this has been the site for human activity for thousands of years and was previously Wendat territory, but this nation perished due to disease brought over by the settlers. Currently, it is a territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fighters Confederacy. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation. So I wanted to share that land acknowledgement before we get started, talking about sort of uncovering common ground. And then also before we start talking about Uncovering Common Ground, I wanted you to just share a little bit about the Jane Goodall Institute. So on the left, we have the beautiful Dr. Jane Goodall with her sidekick, Mr. H, which she takes everywhere, and let you know that Jane Goodall Institute of Canada is part of one of 50 plus chapters worldwide. So there's Jane Goodall Institutes of like Spain, of Uganda, Australia, all over the world, and to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing here in Canada, but also in Africa. So really the goal of the Jane Goodall Institute is about the restoration of critical habitats to save chimpanzees. And it's really part of a global community conservation organization that advances the vision and the work of Dr. Jane Goodall. So the way we do this is really about supporting the balance of the people, planet, and animals through community-based research. So a lot of the projects that we do in Africa, but also in Canada, is through this community-based approach, where we're not just coming in and being like, hey, this is what we're doing. It's really about sort of seeing what the community needs and working from the ground up. So in Africa, we currently have projects in Senegal and Uganda, and are supporting the sanctuaries through different projects, but also through fundraising in the Republic of Congo and Gombe. And in Canada, the project that we focus most of our efforts on is Roots and Shoots. So Uncovering Common Ground is sort of under the Roots and Shoots umbrella, which is really about helping young people become under the informed generation of conservation leaders. So this quote here from Dr. Jane Goodall is, it says that what you do makes a difference and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. So this sort of quote sort of is the basis for all the work that we do at JGI and is really about the work that we're doing of uncovering common ground.
Hey, Megan, I just want to pop in for a second.
Yeah.
If you click hide at the top, you can hide that little stop sharing bar.
I did not know that. There we go. Thank you. Okie dokie. So like I mentioned, Uncovering Common Ground is part of the Roots and Shoots umbrella. And so what Roots and Shoots is really about is about inspiring young people to make changes in their community. And Uncovering Common Ground is very much about that, but through the lens of reconciliation and decolonization. So what Uncovering Common Ground is, it's a 2-year project which brings together Indigenous and non-Indigenous young people between the ages of 18 and 30. Yes, 18 to 30 is still considered youth in Canada, to do reconciliation and decolonization projects in their community, following the 4 Roots and Shoots approach steps. So the first one is to get inspired. So the way we do this is by bringing in elders and knowledge keepers and community leaders to our orientation to sort of get those wheels turning for the young people to see what's happening in their community, but also to learn a little bit about decolonization and reconciliation, not knowing where they are in sort of their own journey. So the second step is to do the community mapping. So after we've participated in the organization, the youth sort of go back to their own communities and do community mapping, and that can be done in various ways. So one could be just doing research, seeing what sort of organizations, projects, work is being done in the current community. It can be walking around, seeing what there is in your community. Is there a lot of trash? Is there sort of no acknowledgement of traditional lands? Is there a visible presence of Indigenous peoples? And then the third step is to do a project. So after you're doing your community mapping, you sort of see what barriers and gaps there are, and then you pick one of those and you develop a project to address it or to begin to address that. So I'll talk a little bit about what those projects are in Uncovering Common Ground that these youth developed in their next slide. And then the final step of the 4-step approach is to celebrate the work you did, to celebrate community, and to celebrate the partners that you've worked with. So all of these sort of feed into our 3 goals of Uncovering Common Ground. So our first goal is to improve the mutual understanding of reconciliation and decolonization between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And the way we do this is about creating spaces for dialogue and conversation between our Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth, but also really being adamant about the youth partnering with Indigenous organizations to ensure that the work that they're doing is relevant and contextual to the work that Indigenous communities are looking to be done in their community. Second is to support the greater civic engagement, so community responsibility to address social and sustainability issues in their community. So this is done through the projects that they execute. It's developed on their own, it's researched on their own, and it's executed on their own with the support of us. But it's all youth-led to ensure that sort of the generation as they're growing up are going to be doing the work that they want to see in the future. And the final goal is to enhance the hard and soft skills through participation in service opportunities. So obviously doing projects like this, you're going to learn a lot. We ask people to submit sort of a budget of the funds that they'll need to execute the project. We do a little bit of networking, communication, but we also provide different webinars similar to this to talk about what reconciliation looks like across Canada. We talk about a little bit of cultural awareness. We're doing a really cool series for the youth on sort of like a land-based learning, not in person, but virtual, with some Indigenous knowledge keepers from the West Coast. A variety of different things to really support the work that the youth are doing collectively in their projects. So what are they doing beyond sort of the stuff that I've mentioned before? This is sort of the nitty gritty of what they're doing and what they've really shared they've enjoyed throughout the process. So a lot of the work has been about building relationships with their community and other youth and peers in the project. So this lovely picture of Hallie and Danny in the top right corner is at our final forum. And they actually got to know each other through the projects in British Columbia. And so what they've really reported and what they've really shared is that they're so thankful to be able to have this opportunity to not just work with youth from their area, but to work with youth sort of on a national level, sort of get a feel and an understanding of what is happening in all different corners of the province. So next we encourage and we support sort of the talking about and learning about what reconciliation decolonization is, which I'll get to in the next slide. So beyond sort of the definition of what these two things are, we really encourage them to discuss what it actually looks like. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your community? What does it mean to your family, your friends, your elders? And what can you do in order to sort of move that work forward? What actions can you take as a person? What actions can you take as an organization, as a classroom, as a community, as a faculty? It's just different things that you can do in order to move these things forward together. The work that they're doing is creating these projects in their communities to address reconciliation barriers, and also working with Indigenous community members to elevate Indigenous voices and support the current work that they're doing through these partnerships. So, what really is reconciliation and decolonization? I know that in my, I don't know, like it's been a while now, maybe 8 years of sort of doing this work, the definitions and the sort of what it really means has changed. So, what I've really come down to is sort of these two definitions of what reconciliation and decolonization is. So, reconciliation to me is really the goal of all of this work. So, at the end, we'll hopefully do all of this really great work to get to the goal. We're able to live together in harmony. And we're able to sort of provide this future where Indigenous people have the space, the opportunity, the land for them to sort of govern themselves, but also to be proud of who they are and do their own work. So reconciliation is really about addressing past wrongs done to Indigenous peoples, making amends for these wrongs, and improving these relationships. So, like I said, that's sort of the goal. For decolonization is sort of the doing of reconciliation. And the term I more so prefer because I feel like it makes more sense to the work that's being done. Instead of sort of reconciliation work, I feel like decolonizing is sort of the meat and potatoes of the work that needs to be done. So what this is the process of taking apart these sort of colonial imposed ideologies and privileges and really valuing and revitalizing Indigenous knowledge and approaches. So this is providing space for Indigenous youth, community members to sort of govern themselves, sort of educate us, tell us what we need to do, tell us sort of what needs to happen, and really is the work of it. So when I talk about sort of reconciliation as the goal, I really feel decolonization is the work. So what can you sort of do today? So I know this is a question I get a lot. It's like, oh, it's such a big concept, but what can you do? And there's a lot of sort of little things that you could literally start after, if you're in school, maybe not, but after sort of our chat today. So there's like hundreds of books, of videos, of series, of podcasts that you can sort of read or listen to or watch, and they can sort of give you a little bit more information on, say, what reconciliation, decolonization is, the true history of Canada, or just celebrating Indigenous culture. So this great little children's book right here called It's a Mateg, it's called Matega's Branch in Anishinaabemowin, is a great children's book written by sort of a local author that sort of talks about the language in a way that kids can use. And I think that's a really great way to sort of introduce sort of Anishinaabe or Indigenous culture into sort of the classroom or with your kids. And then Braiding Sweetgrass, if you haven't read it, is an amazing, amazing book, which really talks about sort of the difference, the interconnection between Indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge, and sort of the teachings around plants. Robin Wall Kimmer is an amazing author. I've heard her speak too, so if you ever have that opportunity, I highly recommend it. But 2 books. I have some other recommendations if that's a question towards the end that I'd be happy to share. I sort of did some kids, some teens, and some like older youth or adult books. So I'd be happy to share those at the end. Another thing you can do is sort of integrate these teachings into sort of your day-to-day, whether it's on your social media, so sharing about a book you read, or if it's about talking with friends, if it's about talking with peers, integrating it into the classroom, integrating it into your work. I think it's a great thing that you can do, and there's lots of opportunities to do it in different ways. You can integrate Indigenous knowledge and teachings. You can bring in elders. You can bring in knowledge keepers to sort of talk about different things. Is something that I think is a great way to get authentic, really genuine sort of understandings and teachings from Indigenous community into sort of your work. Next is sort of after you've done all these readings and these listenings, you can really take sort of the stuff that you've learned and you've been doing research on and share that information. So share it with your peers, share it, like I said, share it with your classroom, Share it on social media. I know there's lots of stuff going around on social media, which I know I've learned a whole bunch of social media too. So just using your platform to share this information. But I also really think there's such a ripple effect in between you learning something, sharing that with someone else, sharing that with someone else. And peer-to-peer learning, I think, is really underrated in how information gets transferred. And I think that's prevalent, especially today with, I think, I really see it a lot with youth. Another really cool course is Indigenous Canada, done through the University of Alberta. I'm on I think I'm in week 8, and I've done a lot of schooling around this, and I'm learning so much. So I highly recommend it if you have the space or the opportunity to. It's free as well, and I think it's through Coursera, if I'm correct. So uplift Indigenous voices and really celebrate Indigenous people. So this is a great opportunity to do on June 21st, which is National Indigenous Peoples Day. I really like sort of that day because it not just talks about sort of the history of Canada and the history of Indigenous peoples, which is often associated with traumas and stuff like that. It's really about celebrating their culture, their successes, their identities, and I really like it as a different spin. It more focuses on the thriving and the gifts that that Indigenous people have, as opposed to sort of what they've experienced. But on the other hand, on September 30th, which we just passed, was Orange Shirt Day, which also talks about the legacy of residential schools. So I think that keeping those 2 days in mind and sort of bringing in Indigenous people might be a really great opportunity to share some information in a classroom. You can shop Indigenous, so lots of amazing beadwork. Manitoba Mucklucks is an amazing business which sells like moccasins and mucklucks and stuff like that, and it's almost all Indigenous owned, brand created. So I highly recommend checking them out. And the last I wanted to talk to you about is apply. So at the Jane Goodall Institute, we have this grant application process called APE Funds, and APE is Animal, Peoples, and Environment, which has 3 streams: sustainable food, climate change, and Indigenous perspectives. So what this does, it gives about $1,000 to youth looking to do sort of reconciliation-based projects, either in a school, in a organization, or if you're a group. The only sort of 2 things you need to keep in mind is if you're under 18, there needs to be an adult champion, and often you have to be affiliated with an organization or institution because we're unable to transfer an individual $1,000, unfortunately. But it's really easy to do this. You just got to become a member of the Jane Goodall Institute's Roots and Shoots Canada online. So it's just a process. The link's at the bottom of the page there. It's just about filling out this sort of form, and then you're sort of a member. The application is open November 20th, so keep an eye out for that. The project must take place in Canada. Like I mentioned, must be youth-led. And the reports in the project need to be completed by June 15th. But I think this is a really good way if you're looking to sort of do something, bring in an Indigenous knowledge keeper or an elder into the classroom. If you're looking to do, say, a medicine garden, if you're looking to do, say, maybe put a plaque up about some acknowledging the land, sort of whatever you can think of. I think this is a really great way that you're able to get some funds to do this really important work, sort of within your own community, within your classroom, within your organization. There's lots and lots of different variations of what the projects are online, so please feel free to check that out if that's something that you're interested in. And my information is on this slide if you have any additional questions. But that's it for me. Thanks so much for listening to me talk about Uncovering Common Ground. It's an amazing project I'm super passionate about, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your questions.
All right. Well, Meagan, thank you so much for sharing the work you're doing with Uncovering Common Ground and the Jane Goodall Institute. We were lucky here on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants not too long ago. Jane put together a little lesson for us with another organization we work with called the Darwin 200. And so she talked a little bit about her past and getting into, out in the field and chasing passion. So it was
amazing.
A great time. Yeah. All right. Well, let's meet some of our group. So again, a shout out to our legacy schools who are joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. For those who might not be legacy schools yet, I'm going to share a link where you can find a little bit of more information to register for this awesome program. Those tuning in live via YouTube, feel free to use the chat bar to introduce yourselves and to send in some questions. So I should give a shout out to a few groups here. We've got a grade 6 class, grade 8 class joining us in Milton, Ontario. We've got another group joining us in Angus, Ontario, secondary school class. Canada, Ontario, Milton, another group in Milton joining us. Edmonton, very cool to have some Alberta action. Niagara Falls, so great to see so many groups joining us. And feel free to continue sending in those greetings. Looks like Kitchener as well, Grand River, Brampton, Ontario. Let's just do a couple more shout outs here. So awesome, Megan. We've got a great group of students.
Amazing.
Classrooms hanging out with us. So keep those classrooms there. Questions coming there, and let's meet some live groups. So I'm going to bring in our first here, Miss V's class joining us live today. It looks like they're joining us in Milton, a grade 7 and 8 class. How are we doing, Miss V's group?
Hi, we're good. How are you?
Awesome. Great to have you joining us today.
Thank you.
Feel free to go ahead, fire away with a question.
Come on, Becca. Peyton's got a question. He's got a question.
I can always come back if you guys need another minute.
We were still figuring it out.
Okay, I'll come back your way. Let's bring in Chuck's class.
Here, Madison. I'll turn slightly this way.
Ontario, grade 6-7 class.
Hello.
Are you doing 6-7?
We have a question around making connections during COVID. So what is your best advice for making virtual connections within our community with Indigenous groups and Indigenous voices and connecting with elders? I think this year is going to present a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that something that we've sort of learned over the last couple of months is there is definitely sort of a barrier in between bringing in elders and knowledge keepers into these virtual platforms, especially because sitting in circle is such a valuable experience. And very different than obviously this virtual experience. What I do recommend though is I recommend reaching out to if there is anything that you're noticing happening from First Nations or from different organizations. I definitely recommend participating just to sort of get to know sort of what's going on, but also to sort of get your face there. A lot of connections are made sort of through who you know. So if there's a connection you have with a First Nation, or if there's a connection you have with an Indigenous organization through yourself or through a friend or through a friend of a friend, I highly recommend using those to see if they can help work with you to coordinate something. The other option is just doing your best to support, if it is elders and knowledge keepers, about doing what you can to support them in using these virtual platforms. A lot of the elders I work with barely use email, so a lot of the stuff is done over phone, or if it's done sort of like I email somebody and they sort of connect with them. So just providing the support that you can, whether it's doing sort of a lesson before on how to use Zoom or StreamYard, which we're using today, just providing the additional support. But I think if sort of you can use your connections to see hey, what's the possibility of getting, we work with an elder Kat Prager to come on a Zoom call, work with someone see if they can reach out. I'd highly recommend that. But I also highly recommend sort of doing the virtual and the online support where possible, because that has been a barrier for us, just sort of figuring out how to navigate those two different worlds and sort of bring them together.
Okay, great question to get us started.
For sure.
Another class. Well, I want to give a shout out to Mr. Sellen's group first. So Mr. Sellen's group is joining us from Timmins, Ontario. It's a grade 6 class. They're connected live in the call, but don't have a camera connected. So feel free, Mr. Sellen, to use the private chat. Send us in a question from your grade 6s, and we will work it into the call. So we're going to bring another group in live with us. We're going to go to Miss Charles' class. Miss Charles' class is joining us from Brampton. Looks like a grade 6 class. How are we doing today, Brampton? Oh, you have to unmute for me, Miss Charles.
Sorry, we came in a little bit late.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have a question for Megan?
Not at the moment. We don't have a question at the moment. It's not good.
All right. We'll come back your way. No worries.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Good news is Miss V's class says they are ready. So let me bring them in with a question.
Amazing.
Okay.
we're going to bring Sam in first, and then we have another question as well. So go ahead.
Perfect.
Nice and loud, Sam.
Do you guys have an Instagram page that we could follow or like share with our friends? So
Yes, it's Jane Goodall Canada. I'm gonna double check because I can't remember 100%.
That down.
Jane Goodall Can. Yeah, it's Jane Goodall Can, CAN. And you'll see a little picture of Jane with Mr. H there, which is her sidekick. Sound good?
Right.
Yeah, perfect. Good question.
Okay, so I'm just gonna ask. I had a student back here asking about the APE funds that you were talking about, and I'm gonna build on his question a little bit. Do you have an example of perhaps a reconciliation project that like a middle school class has done, like around grades 6, 7, and 8, that might inspire us? And then to build on with Zaka, he was asking if I think you said this, but can classrooms apply for those funds or groups of classrooms in a school? So we've also been learning a lot about like the situation with the Mi'kmaq and things like that. So we're really starting to get interested in what reconciliation might look like.
Yeah, 100%. So a really great example of an 8 fund project that happened, I think it was last year, is they actually did a medicine garden. So they were able to create with stones sort of a medicine wheel, and then in each of the 4 quadrants, they're able to plant tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, and cedar tree, which is going to take a little bit longer to grow. But that's an example of one of the projects they've done. Another project example, just so you're aware of, is that you could sort of take and to do sort of like a reconciliation theme, is I was actually able to speak with a classroom last year. They were grade 4, I think. And what they did is they created a space in their yard called a safe space. So what they did is they created a really nice corner where there was medicines that were sort of like in a box that you could ask a teacher to unlock that they could use at recess. There was a bench. There was sort of just like a nice bush area, but all the medicines were sort of like, if you've seen them, like those like library mailboxes where people can take books or food. It's sort of like one of those, but medicines, and it was available in the schoolyard. You could do that. An example is you could just also do an information sort of like campaign where you create resources and you share them throughout the school. You could bring in elders to talk about it, or you could bring in maybe someone who's from the East Coast to talk about something, if that's what you're focusing on. And you can sort of do like a campaign around that. There's lots of options that you're more than welcome to sort of check out there. And what was the second part? Sorry.
They were wondering if those funds could be accessed by classrooms or groups of classrooms.
Right. Yes, 100%. So actually, most of the 8 fund applicants are teachers or classrooms. We have these things. They're mostly in Winnipeg called whole schools, where the entire school applies for a larger chunk of funds, where all of the classrooms in the school will do something. So if you and maybe another class or 2 other classes are looking to do something, you can apply together, or you can apply sort of as a teacher individually. So if I post in the chat, Joe, can everybody see that?
Everybody can see who's on camera with us, and I can take whatever you post and drop it in the YouTube chat as well.
So I will just post the link to the 8 fund in the chat, and then that way you can check it out. Applications open in November, so you can use October to sort of get your brain juices flowing of what you'd like to do, and then you can sort of apply as a class. That's where most of our 8 fund goes anyway.
Okay, I see it there in the chat, so the classrooms who are with us on camera can see it now, and in a minute or 2, I will share it to the YouTube chat as well. Speaking of YouTube, we should take a little trip over there and visit some questions there. So we do have a couple questions that came in. One is, I'm going to fire 2 at you right now. One, they're wondering if you've ever met Jane Goodall yourself. And then the second question that's come in so far is, in the intro, we mentioned a little bit about, where is it here in my intro? There it is. We mentioned a little bit, how you're passionate about reconciliation, decolonization. So a couple of the classrooms were just wondering, can you elaborate on that term a little bit more?
Yeah. So the first question, I have not met Jane Goodall. I was supposed to meet her in March with some of the youth from Uncovering Common Ground, but she ended up not traveling, and thankfully, because COVID hit, so we weren't able to meet, which I was very, very disappointed about. So hopefully someday soon I'll be able to meet her when sort of things get back up and running again, and it's safe for Dr. Jane Goodall to sort of travel. So fingers crossed for that. And yeah, so reconciliation and decolonization, I definitely agree, are very, very large terms. And like I mentioned before, what I really like to sort of think of them as is decolonization is sort of the work of reconciliation. So over the last, we'll say year, I feel that reconciliation, sort of the idea as there's been lots of stuff sort of online and stuff about what that really looks like. And I think just in conversations with peers and some youth that we've worked with, decolonization, which is really the work of sort of breaking down sort of these Canadian imposed sort of settler views on Indigenous people, breaking those away to create these spaces for sort of these Indigenous approaches and ideologies to sort of flourish. So if you think of it like ice, we're sort of breaking up the colonial ice so like the water can come through and flow, which is the Indigenous and knowledge and teachings and approaches. So they're able to do things like self-govern. There's a lot of conversation around getting their land back, or even having treaty rights acknowledged. I think that decolonization as an individual level is some of the work that we've talked about, is sharing information, sort of working through understanding your own privilege, is reading and listening and learning about your stuff. And sort of on a higher level, it's about sort of acknowledging treaty rights, staying true to those rights, which we see sort of happening in the East Coast. Yeah, I think that's sort of what I am believing and sort of going through. For me, it changes very often. I feel like it's a very sort of fluid idea, especially as like things change, right? An example is sort of the knowledge about what happened, the true history of Canada. That wasn't really known. I know within my at least last 10 years of sort of doing this work and learning myself, is that sort of what that is has changed a lot, and what it means changes too. A beautiful sort of idea, one of my a really great idea that I heard from Susan Metha, which is somebody that we brought on Uncovering Common Ground, is that as far as sort of the truth and reconciliation, I feel like we're very much still in the truth. We're still in the phase of listening. And I think that if you're able to do something right now, I highly recommend that you do that, whether it's listening to Indigenous speakers. There's amazing speakers that are coming on as a part of Secret Path Week. I'm very excited. So listening to them, reading, watching, like I mentioned before. So that's, I hope that answers your question. It's a conversation and sort of topic that it evolves for me, and I think that it should be evolving.
Okay, coming back in, we're going to bring another classroom in with us. Ms. Hexmer's class is joining us. They're joining us in Ottawa. How are we doing, Ottawa?
Hello, hi everyone.
Hey,
Hello.
So we have two questions. I have a question and I have a student with a question. So I'm gonna let my student go first. Go ahead and ask your question.
So what inspired you to get into this field?
Great question. So I didn't grow up around my culture. My grandfather attended residential school, and my grandmother, they're both Indigenous on my dad's side. She was from northern Quebec, and she was taken from her community very, very young. So sort of that idea was not included in sort of my family. So when I first learned about sort of my Indigenous identity and sort of exploring that and what that means, and talking to my grandfather and my grandmother a little bit more as I got older, I think that what really stand out for me is the fact that it was so wrong for my grandparents to even be who they were. So I think that sort of realization really sort of launched me into sort of this work. So not just the work that I've been doing with urban Indigenous communities, but really sharing and information about reconciliation and decolonization. I am so pleased and so happy to see how normal and how normalized this information is right now. I don't know if that's just within my networks, but I'm just seeing a lot more and more of it sort of in the media, and appropriately done in the media, on social media, in conversations. So many more land acknowledgements before the work that we're doing. So I feel like just my grandparents' sort of realities and sort of my lived reality growing up is really what sort of launched me into this work. Good question. Thank you.
Showing us some books and resources earlier. You mentioned that you had more books to recommend, and particularly, I was thinking of this age group, so we're a grade 8 class. So I was just wondering if there are any particular resources, books, etc., that you would recommend for grade 8.
Yeah, two really good books, which I, when I used to work with youth, that we actually read together, was #NotYourPrincess. So it's a collection of different like comics, poems, sort of stories, short stories that people have compiled into this sort of book, which I really enjoyed. So Not Your Princess. And a Coyote Columbus story was a really unique take on sort of the history through a unique perspective. So those are the two that I really recommend. Braiding Sweetgrass I really liked as well, depending sort of on sort of what you're looking to read, and The Marrow Thieves as well. Those are like the 4 that I highly recommend. But there's also lots more online if those don't sort of aren't what you're looking for. But those I've read Not Your Princess and I really liked it. So I definitely recommend that one.
Thanks so much. I've read the last 2 that you mentioned, Marrow Thieves and Braiding Sweetgrass, and we'll share some of them with my students, but the first 2 are new to me, so thanks.
Yeah, and The Secret Path is really great too.
Yes, they've seen it as well. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Joe.
All right. Thanks for the great questions. Let's see if we have anything in the chat here. Let's see if we can grab another question. So I'm glad that question came up about, where your passion arose, because Ms. DeSanto's class, who's tuning in, they were really curious about that as well. The classrooms who are joining us live on camera, feel free to give me a wave if you have another question. I'll come back and visit your group because we have at least a couple more minutes. We can maybe squeeze in 1 or 2 more. So Mrs. Walchuk's class, you're back.
Oh, hi again.
Hey, everyone.
Wait, Madison, he has a question.
I don't have a question.
Right there. Oh. Can you see yourself on camera, Becca?
Yeah.
Oh, go down. Okay, go ask.
Hi.
Hi.
How long was your grandpa in a residential school for?
So he actually didn't talk much about it. It was an interesting time getting him to just sort of discuss his history, and it was sort of done through a roundabout way with my grandmother and my dad. So oftentimes when I was able to talk to him about it, it wasn't always great things he had to say, just because his time in the residential school was not good. There's a lot of traumas that he's carried from that. So he doesn't actually talk about how long he was there. He just would talk about sort of like how bad it was, and he would just sort of make sideward comments. But we think it was for 4 years, 4 to 6 years is what we're thinking.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, sometimes those periods just aren't easy to talk about. Yeah. That's we had our first Secret Path week last year, and that was a theme that came up often. Is it is difficult to talk about and share those stories sometimes. Miss Charles' class, I'm going to pop in just in case you guys have a question for us. No pressure, but if you do, we'd love to grab it from you before we wrap up today.
No, we don't have a question still. We kind of joined a little bit late. Sorry.
That's okay. No big deal.
Hi.
All right. Do check out, I posted the link to the APE Fund in the YouTube. So classrooms who are tuning in via YouTube, you should check that out. It's also in the private chat for our camera classrooms. So that's a great way to join in there as well. And yeah, hopefully we get some groups that are interested in taking part. And let's see here. Oh, can you, Ms. Hexmer's class, she got the Not Your Princess, the Marrow Thief, and Braiding Sweetgrass, but I think there was a second title that was missed. Do you know which one it was, Megan?
Yeah, it's a Coyote Columbus story. I just threw it in the chat.
Coyote Columbus story, perfect. All right, so some great stories to check out in your classrooms. So before I wrap up today, I do want to give a couple shares here. So I'm going to bring up a couple banners. First, I want to direct classrooms to check out, the Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund, if you haven't checked it out before. So that's the website link there. If your school or classroom might be interested in becoming a legacy school, you can find more information there. You can find some great resources to use around reconciliation as well, and see some of the other activities happening around Secret Path Week. So that link is down there, downeywenjack.ca. And the second link I want to share is for Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So our website is exploringbytheseat.com. You can either use this link here, event/Secret Path Week, or if you just go to the website, look under special events, you'll see Secret Path Week. We have so many great events coming up with Indigenous leaders and artists and scientists. It's going to be a lot of fun. You can register to tune in live, like some of our classrooms did today, and interact with questions, or you can tune in via YouTube, either live or the recording afterwards, and still send us in some questions. So we hope to see lots of classrooms joining us. In fact, we have 2 more events still to go live today, so lots of fun coming up. Shout out to our YouTube classrooms. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sending in some great questions. Thank you to our camera classrooms from all different places around Canada. Thank you for sharing with us. And Meagan, thank you for sharing the work you're doing. Thank you for sharing your passion. And it sounds like, you know, through the 8 Fund and other projects that the Jane Goodall Institute is doing some great work uncovering common ground. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you, Joe, for the opportunity. I had a really great time and was able to chat with a couple different classrooms. I really enjoyed that.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We hope to see lots more classrooms joining us for the rest throughout the week for Secret Path Week events. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.